I'm with Rick and Katie today and wanted to introduce y'all to the owners of Rosewood Farm in Elkton, Maryland. Rick, Katie, if y'all would give us just a little movie trailer version of Rosewood Farm, what y'all do, the client you serve, some stuff like that.
Sure. Thanks, Justin. Thank you for that introduction. So, Rosewood Farms, as Justin said, we're in Elkton, Maryland, just over the Delaware line. We have bunches of buildings here. We started back in 2017, and we try to look for our premier clients, our premier brides and grooms, sort of call ourselves a luxury venue, which I think is important. And we're having fun. We're a family business, having fun.
Well, speaking of the family business, Katie, tell me a little bit about who all's involved. I know that's super important to y'all. Is all the family members are involved heavily in the business.
Yes, we are. We are family owned, but our whole workforce here is our family, right? Even if they're not blood related, we still consider them our Rosewood family. But it's my dad, myself, and my brother. And then from there, my sister-in-law, which is Matt's wife, actually joined us just recently as well. So, we are family owned and operated, and we pride ourselves on that. And that's so important that at the core, we kind of exemplify that through, our staff, the experience, and what Rosewood Farms is.
So tell me a little bit about like some background here when we connected. What was happening at the farm, or what made you reach out and say, "Hey, let's talk to Justin." What happened there?
Well, I think it happened when I was listening to a podcast and I heard this guy, Justin, and I said, boy, that's got a guy I got to connect with. Because and it wasn't even just necessarily the podcast. Yeah, of course, that's kind of an intro, but I think it was more about listening to what you said, and the word that kept on going through my brain was risk. And the risk of what, I think sometimes in risk, we think about that, but we don't think about that. It's something that comes up when, of course, when something happens. And when something happens, then, well, that's not so good. But I think I got in front of it when I heard that podcast and said, what are we doing? Are we protected? What are some of the things that we're not protected with? And what can we do for just a wee bit better? So it wasn't about premiums. It wasn't about coverage so much. I think one of the biggest things was about contract review. How important that is to be able to go through contract review and understand what we have in our contracts. And of course, we had contracts that were built off of other people's contracts and templates and went through lawyers and multiple reviews. And our contracts were built off experiences that we've had here. So I think probably the way that capsulizes risk mitigation, risk management.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times kind of the buzzword always is insurance, or I need a quote. It's like, kind of the hot topic on people's minds. And that's, I never want to run from that. That's something we do. Did you really get a feeling that when you talked to us at first, that was like our experience is just a product and not a process? Or like, what was in the initial call and kind of those first couple of meetings, like what was the feeling that y'all got?
Well, I hardly remember yesterday, let alone a couple of years ago. I think if I recall, I do remember talking. I'm somewhat reserved in trying to try to listen the best I can, to try to absorb and then make some opinions based on maybe those initial conversations. And I guess some of the better way to maybe pose that question is, what were some of my takeaways from that, is that you're not a pushy guy. You're a guy that kind of lays it all out there and lets, I think, the client kind of make some decisions based on what you put in front of them. And I think that was one thing that really helped me, because I don't want to put people in little pigeonholes here, but sometimes, as you said, in the insurance business, it can be very transactional. And in those, you can go to the internet. We can all buy insurance in a couple minutes here, and just go on the internet and buy it. But that's not what you portrayed. You portrayed And you have the family aspect, you have the relationship aspect, I think was probably one of the biggest things, but also you weren't pushy at all, and you just kind of laid it out there and said, don't take this wrong, but hey, if this works for you, this works for you. If you've done it, done it. So that was valuable to me, to be able to have that kind of relationship built from the get-go.
Yeah. And I think it was the whole package too. So it wasn't just contract review, but it was what our policies are, what the policies our couples are purchasing, how we protect ourselves and our staff here. And I think you just kind of laid it out there to make sure that we had the whole package. It wasn't just segmented, and it wasn't just the insurance policy. You kind of looked at us as a whole. And because we have a lot of moving parts and, multiple different business entities, I think you took all that into consideration and kind of helped us through that whole process, and not just an insurance policy.
I think the other part was bundling too, because we have a bunch of different things here. We have Rosewood Farms, and we have our beverage business. We've got another business that kind of takes on the land and property, and even just simple things like helping with a beverage bartender package that kind of lays out the roles, responsibilities, and the accountability that goes through some of that stuff, so everybody understands, was very helpful, at least.
I appreciate that. I guess we get to pain points before, we met, and kind of some of the things that were, I don't know if you could say heavy on your heart, or more, maybe they just kind of didn't feel right, or you weren't 100% clear if they were put together the way they should be. Can you point out any of those things that specifically came to mind? I mean, is there anything that you can think of right off the top of your head that you immediately saw some benefit with?
Well, I typically don't like to throw other people under the bus so much, but if there may be some topical things about maybe a little bit of responsiveness, and maybe not so much of that, but I think in just an understanding of of our business, an understanding of our contracts, an understanding of how we work our business, and maybe having a broad breadth of things, of different insurers that are available, might have been a few things that our previous insurer might have had a little problem. Like I said, I don't like to badmouth anybody, but maybe there was distinctions there that you brought to the table that were different than what he was providing.
Because I also think, you bring a very niche aspect of, venue ownership. And I think maybe that's what we were missing was, having that, very detailed idea of what ownership includes and what it means to own a venue, and the relationships that you've created along the way have really kind of molded that, I believe, but also knowing how to protect us. And not, like I said earlier, not only to protect us, but to protect everyone that's here, and whether that's the couple and our vendors and ourselves, ensuring that we're set up in the best position and we have the best stance moving forward.
Yeah. And, like you said, Rick, I don't think it's necessarily I count it kind of as a blessing that, I'm lucky enough to have one client. A lot of people don't. And I'm lucky in that regard, because we only work with a person who is doing a similar business to every other person we work with. So, that kind of puts it on me to be a little bit more knowledgeable about, what you're doing and how it should all fit together. So, I think anybody that was, being open and honest would say, if there's somebody that specializes in this one thing, maybe it's a better idea. So I don't I don't think you're throwing anybody under the bus at all. So, and in that aspect, I think choosing a partner, not necessarily a product. And I know that partner thing is like when you're paying money for something, like maybe it doesn't necessarily feel like a partnership, but how would you guys classify that relationship? Would you feel like you could call us a partner in your business and like helping you make sure it's taken care of the way it needs to be?
Absolutely. I consider you part of the Rosewood family, and a partners, and that's a funny word. And I consider you person that understands our business and understands and probably takes our business to heart. If we had some sort of something that happened here, you would not feel good. You wouldn't feel good about that. You do. I believe you would do everything you could possibly do to make sure that whatever happened here was resolved as best you can make it resolved. And within that, if you want to call it a partnership, I think it develops over time, and that relationship develops over time. And there's other bolt-on things that happen because of our relationship. To be able to go to a conference down in Asheville, to bolt on the wedding bride, what the insurance that the couple buys, the event insurance, to have those kind of things available through the relationship that we build is invaluable and helpful.
I appreciate that. Speaking of the event insurance type of that kind of area, how do you feel like you guys were managing that before, and then maybe how did that change, and was that a better experience after we were able to help that? Could you get into that just a little bit?
Yeah, so we would require all of our events to have event insurance, but we didn't specify who it had to come from. We just had minimums. So that kind of left it open to different insurance carriers. We tried to help navigate that with our couples and kind of narrowed it down to a few of them. And I thought it kind of worked okay until you kind of brought your product in the mix and we realized how streamlined it really can be. So, once we book a couple, it doesn't fall back in our lap with the event insurance. You guys kind of take it from there, which made it so much easier. We knew the product that we were getting. We knew, the communication we were getting. We knew that the couple would be appropriately covered, and we knew that it would be taken care of from start to finish. So I think that was the difference between us kind of letting them choose a carrier versus, now requiring them to go through you guys to ensure appropriate coverage and that it truly gets done from start to finish.
Yeah. Do you feel like that saved you some time? Like that streamlining that process a little bit? Like you don't have to check back in with them and stuff like that?
Yeah. Once everything is done and you guys have done all the follow-up, our man hours are kind of now geared towards other things, instead of chasing our tail and figuring out why they haven't purchased it. At the end of the day, we get proof of coverage and we move on. So you guys really take the bundle of it and, you do the follow-up, you ensure that they have coverage, and, we can kind of turn off that switch a little bit, but we make sure, obviously, once the event is here, we know that they are appropriately covered.
So I guess to kind of wrap up and talk a little bit about at what point did you feel like, hey, this has been a good decision and we feel like we're in a better place? When do you think that happened?
I think it would be, and again, I'm not going to premiums or anything like that, but I think it would be when we wrapped up the contract review and we sent it off to our lawyer and he said, all is good. That's when I felt like home run. We got that. We've mitigated we've reduced our risk the best we can through contract review. Now it's time to go find some coverage and find a really good premium and then kind of move on and keep on. So that's where I felt like we had worked, and it was not a minute. It was not, that was an activity that took some effort, back and forth and around, and you had to get to know us. We had to get to know you. There was lots of paperwork to review and lots of changes to make, but how worthwhile and how fruitful. That was good stuff.
Yeah.
That was good stuff.
I agree.
But by the time we made it through that, I think all those hours that they will pay back. Hopefully they never pay back at all, that we don't have to deal with any of that stuff. But they will pay back if anything we ever have to deal with in that sense.
And you're very organized. You kept us on track.
I think 99% of my job is just diligence. How do we stay on track? And sometimes I get off track. I'll be the first to admit, having a plan in place is a whole lot better than, and I say this to people all the time, a product goes out the window if you don't have a plan. So if you have a plan and a product, that's a little bit more of a recipe for success. if you guys could take a postcard and mail it back to prenuptial Rosewood, what would it say?
Thanks for the journey. Thanks for coming along with us. We appreciate it, and looking forward to many times sitting on the beach in Cancun with you.
I'm looking forward to that too. We're gonna have to book. We're gonna have to book something on my calendar for sure.
There we go.
Tell me.
Cancun.
Yeah, we need to have. So kind of funny. Once we had that last little how-to rendezvous, one of our other owners, they're building a house in St. John, and he came up to me and said, "We're going to have a St. John rendezvous." And he said, "In fact, my house is going to overlook Rendezvous Bay." I was like,
"Oh, that's nice." Perfect. And of course, you said yes.
Fine. As soon as you get that done, let me know, and we'll get it lined up. So a venue owner watching this who feels a little bit overwhelmed, maybe unsure, kind of buried in the details, what would you, in terms of advice, give that person if they're thinking about talking to us?
Yeah, I'd probably try to maybe do the same thing we did. Just listen. Try to understand your perspective and your point of view. Listen to some stories and some things that you've lived through that would be relatable to the venue owner. And I think if you can listen to some stories and you can build some relationship and you build family and you get an understanding, then you can get into the nuts and bolts. I think the nuts and bolts are the easy part. It's not really the easy part because there's still a lot of work to do. But when you get into contract review and the premiums and how much should this building be worth and all that, I think that's the easier part. But that first beginning part of the relationship, and do some listening and understanding of, I go back to risk and some of the experiences and some of the things that maybe keep you awake at night, and share. So that's what I'd probably say.
It's worth to have that conversation with you to just understand, where there's holes and where you can be helpful. And like I said earlier, you really take the whole aspect of our journey. And it wasn't just, a little contract review or changing up our policy a little bit, but you really kind of took us under your wings and really said, okay, let's look at this now. Or, now that we feel good about that, this should be something else that we should be thinking about. So you really took, your time with us. You guided us through the whole process, and you really had an understanding of what we were looking for, and then kind of produce how you can be helpful.
So in closing, 3 words that you think describes nuptial. Just blurt them out. It could be, can't stand that guy. To our emails.
Let's see. I go with relationship, family, and fun.
That's pretty good. Very organized, and you know what you're doing.
Wow, that's 6 good words.